We are now 24 hours away from the NFL's free agent frenzy, and the closer we get to this year's NFL draft, the more we hear about the lack of top end talent. But I don't know if there's enough people talking about how deep this year's class is, especially at certain positions like the defensive line and running back. Jim Nagy, the director of the Senior Bowl, was quoted saying while there isn't the top end talent of normal years, there are close to 50 players with borderline first round grades. A perfect year to have three picks in the top 50. Adam Schefter says the player you get at pick number 10 in this year's draft is going to be very similar to the players going in the first half of the second round. Again, pointing towards the Bears potentially being able to land three first round quality prospects. Scouts continue to talk about the depth in this year's class. And while last year was known as the year of the wide receiver, this year is considered to be the year of the defensive end. But it's not just the DE, it's an incredible draft for the entire defensive line. And we know Ryan Poles likes to look ahead and study the strengths of the drafts. This season is also a special year for the running back class as well. But today I wanted to go ahead and stack the board side by side and show off which positions are the strongest in this year's draft when it comes to the Bears' positions of need in the trenches. Let's go ahead and get right into it. So, while we've talked a lot about how it's a perfect year for the defensive line, running backs, and a couple other positions, this is not a strong year for any team looking for a left tackle. There are only 7 total tackles in my top 100. There were 15 in 2024, so less than half the tackles we had last season. But part of the reason is because so many of the tackles are being projected to move inside to guard, making it a pretty strong season for anyone looking to beef up the interior of the offensive line, such as the Chicago Bears. So I do believe the Bears will be looking to draft a guard or center in the first few rounds of this draft. And there are various options who can come in and develop behind the veteran or even compete to be a starter. But the best news comes on the defensive line. Remember last year there were 19 wide receivers in the top 100, a crazy amount. But this year we have even more edge rushers ranked in the top 100. I have 19 listed on the screen, but there are also three other players I couldn't fit in. 22 of my top 100 players play defensive end, and then 15 of my top 100 are at D tackle. That's 37 of my top 100 players come from the defensive line. That's more than one out of every three players is a defensive lineman. That means one out of every three players being drafted in the first few rounds of this draft could come from the defensive line. But even though it's not a strong class for offensive tackles, this draft still fits the Bears' needs perfectly. With 55 of my top 100 players coming from the trenches, this is looking at those positions side by side. So you have over 35 defensive linemen and 19 guys on the offensive line, and this gives Ryan Poles plenty of opportunities to fix the trenches this season. We need to invest some draft picks into the offensive and defensive line, regardless of who else we sign in free agency. We need some young guys to develop behind these guys as well. But by far the biggest strength in this year's draft class comes from the edge rushers. All of the guys listed on my screen are in the top 100, and there's even a few more that I couldn't even list, but there's just so much talent on this defensive line that Ryan Poles has to add at least one edge rusher in this year's class, and I'd probably say one defensive tackle as well if you ask me. It's not a year to really get cute and try to replace Braxton Jones. This season is about continuing to take advantage of the strengths in the draft class. So to me, you grab a couple of guys on the interior of the O line and a couple of guys for this defensive line as well. There's simply too much talent in the trenches in this year's draft to try and get cute. And I get it. It's also a special year for running backs, and this class has one of my favorite safety prospects I've studied in a long time as well. So when I see people mock drafting Ashton Genty or safety Nick Emmanwori to the Bears, I get it. But the focus of this draft has to be in the trenches. And I think taking a running back somewhere between rounds 2 and 5 also would make perfect sense. Now, after trading for two big time guards this week, I was going to say if we sign Drew Dahlman, I'd be all aboard the Ashton Genty hype train. But with the Raiders trading for Geno Smith yesterday, I believe Genty is most likely off the board by pick 10. So the Bears are most likely still to pick a defensive lineman in round one, but I wouldn't rule out offensive line either. And that segues into my next topic, the Bears' options at pick 10 in the NFL draft. After trading for two guards, are the Bears still likely to look offensive line in round one? I would say it's much less likely right now. My three top my top three options are guys who will most likely not be on the board when the Bears pick. Abdul Carter, Mason Graham, and Ashton Genty. After those three players, my list contains guys I think have a high chance of being on the board at pick number 10. I do not see the Bears going outside of the trenches in round one, at least not before free agency kicks off. I also don't think drafting a cornerback, wide receiver, or linebacker early makes sense. Maybe a tight end, but in the top 10, I just don't know about that. But these are my current leaders for the Bears heading into free agency. I think in just a few days, we'll be able to narrow this list down majorly. Based on what the Bears do over the next 72 hours, James Pierce Jr. is currently the guy I would keep my eye on. The pass rusher from Tennessee has some rumors going around about his character, but he is a freak pass rusher. But I look for the Bears to draft defensive line in round one as I sit here today. But another point here, if you want to look forward to 2026's draft class, it's looking like a big year for offensive tackles next season. So it makes even more sense for Ryan Poles to draft some interior offensive linemen, upgrade the D line this year, take advantage of the strengths in the draft, and then give Braxton Jones one more year, let him compete with Karan Amagaji, and then maybe sign a swing tackle in free agency as well. And then if nobody steps up, he can use his first round pick next year to grab one of the top tackle prospects in a very strong class. But with free agency less than 24 hours away, I kind of wanted to show you guys how the board stacks up as the Bears' biggest positions of need when it comes to the draft. This might help understand Ryan Poles' free agent decisions. The bottom line, though, is this: the Chicago Bears are in a great position heading into free agency in the draft, and the future of this franchise is in great hands with Ryan Poles. Right now, we have a perfect opportunity this offseason to really improve the roster. The strengths of this year's free agent class and draft fit what the Bears roster needs. We can get three impact players in the draft, and we've already added two impact players on the O line. The 2025 offseason is all about the trenches, and after adding two quality guards, I think the top priority in free agency needs to be finding a center and then adding to this pass rush. Keep an eye on guys like Drew Dahlman, Josh Myers, Andre James, and Ryan Kelly at center. And then at defensive end, there's a ton of guys to look out for. Khalil Mack, Chase Young, Hassan Reddick, and Matthew Judon top the list, but there's a ton of other guys to keep an eye on as well. I have a big free agency preview on the way tonight. Stay tuned for that. Remember to hit the like button for me, and until next time, bear down.